and welcome to this edition of African Transformation Spotlight. I'm Maura Leary, Director of Communications at the African Center for Economic Transformation. We are an African-led, African-driven policy institute based in Ghana, focused on the entire African continent and connected to the world. Today, I'm really excited to welcome Habtamu Edjigu, who's a Structural Transformation and Economic Growth Fellow. We call that STEG for short. STEG is implemented by a consortium led by the Center for Economic Policy Research, which includes ACET, the University of Oxford, the University of Notre Dame, the Yale Research Initiative on Innovation and Scale, and the Groningen Growth and Development Center. Habtamu has recently joined ACET, and we wanted to ask him a few questions about the work he's doing. So Habtamu, welcome, and let's jump right into my first question. As a STEG fellow at ACET, you're currently looking at the impact of linkages between multinational enterprises and domestic manufacturing firms. Can you tell us a little more about the type of research you're conducting and the questions you're trying to answer?
Thank you, Maura. Thank you. Yes. So as you mentioned, my research topic is on assessing the impact of the linkage between multinational enterprises and domestic firms on labor productivity and technological upgrading in Africa. And the motivation behind this research is that many African countries are striving to attract foreign direct investment by multinational enterprises, expecting not only foreign exchange, but also productivity and technological spillovers. However, there is no any empirical or established empirical studies on how and whether the incoming multinational enterprises are actually stimulating labor and technological upgrading in the host countries. And moreover, when we look at recent foreign direct investment trend in Africa, there are at least three interesting developments. The first one is that the size of foreign direct investment has increased hugely. If you look at the last 2 decades, for example, in 1990, the total foreign direct investment coming to Africa was about $3 billion, and in 20 years, in 2021, it has increased to $83 billion. So the increase is huge, like more than by 20 times. And secondly, the sector is shifting from extractive sector or the multinational enterprises investment is shifting from extractive sector to productive sectors. Previously, the foreign direct investors were attracted to invest in the extractive sectors, including mining and oil. But recently, manufacturing sectors, including beverage and food, textile and garments, leather and footwear are becoming attractive to multinational enterprises. And the third interesting development is that the foreign direct investment is shifting from the west to the east. So in the previous years, the main investors, foreign investors, were coming from the Western countries, including the US, the UK, Netherlands, Germany, France, and other Western countries. But recently, East Asian countries are attracted and are investing hugely in the continent, in countries such as China, India, South Korea, and so forth. Okay, so we are trying to understand all these dynamics, and specifically we aim to answer three research objectives. The first one is we want to see the extent of linkages with multinationals across countries and over time. So we want to compare which African countries are having better linkage with multinational enterprises. And we want to see if the linkage is increasing over time or decreasing, okay? And the second specific objective is that we want to see the three forms of linkage with multinational enterprises and examine whether that linkage is improving labor productivity and technological upgrading in Africa. Okay. The third objective is that we want to see if the shift in FDI from the west to the east is actually has a different impact on labor productivity and technological upgrading, which means that whether the origin or nationality of foreign investors really matters on the extent of the spillover effect. So these are the three key objectives that we are trying to address. Thank you.
Thanks. So Briefly, can you tell me how you think the findings of your study will help contribute to economic transformation and private sector development in Africa?
Yes, so in our institution, ACET, we believe that economic transformation is a sum of economic growth and depth. So when we say depth here in ACET, we mean by diversification, export competitiveness, productivity, technological upgrading, and human well-being. So the question is, how are we going to make this in the case of Africa? So my research here is trying to explore the drivers of labor productivity and technological upgrading, which are the two components of depth. Okay, and the finding of my research will provide policymakers an evidence whether and how the linkage with multinational enterprise improves labor productivity and technological upgrading, which are key components of economic transformation. It will also provide an insight on how to maximize the gain from multinational enterprises. These are key also for private sector development. So private sector development is central to African economic growth and economic transformation. However, we need drivers of the components of economic transformation. And my research will provide policy insights in this area.
Excellent. So you're coming to us with a body of experience previously, doing different kinds of research. So based on that previous experience, what do you expect to find in terms of that impact of the multinational linkages on labor productivity and technological upgrading? You've just gotten into that as two of the really key pillars of ACET's recipe for economic growth, for economic transformation, which is growth with depth. So what do you think some of those impacts might be?
So yes, so I would expect at least three key findings. So before even going to see the the impact of the linkage with multinational enterprise on labor productivity and technological upgrading, I will try to see the extent of linkage and compare African countries, which African countries showing a better linkage with multinational enterprise. And obviously, I would expect differences in terms of level of linkage. I'll also look at the level of productivity and the level of technological upgrading, and I would expect a difference in terms of these two key outcome variables. And when looking at the impact of the linkage with multinational enterprise, I would expect more linkage will increase labor productivity and technological upgrading. But the most interesting part will be whether equity alliance or international joint venture has a difference impact on labor productivity compared to non-equity alliance, such as foreign technology licensing or international supply linkage. I believe international joint venture or equity alliance may have bigger impact in terms of labor productivity and technological upgrading, because most African firms have financial constraints, and the incoming multinational enterprise could be a source of finance to them. So yeah, it's very difficult, or it's ambiguous to predict from now, but that's what I would expect. And in terms of whether the origin or nationality of incoming foreign firms, I would expect, yes, it will matter because the incoming firms from different areas have different managerial experience, different level of trust, different language, and there could be also trade treaties and investment treaties between the host and the source countries. So the origin or nationality of foreign investors may have different level of technology and productivity spillover on the domestic firms.
Great, very interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting linkages found there. So what do you think? I mean, can you give me, say, three, let's say, positive examples of economic policies that have really helped the domestic private sector benefit from foreign investment in African countries? What have you seen across your research? A couple of economic policies where you say that one works, that was a really good policy decision, and just give me very briefly a couple.
Okay, thank you. So yes, in order to increase the benefit from multinational enterprise, we have to do two things. First, we have to improve or increase foreign direct investment, and second, we have to improve linkage with multinational enterprises. So just increasing FDI doesn't necessarily mean that we will increase linkage, but it is a first order condition. So one of the positive economic policy that I could mention is the industrial parks from Ethiopia. So the establishment of industrial parks in Ethiopia has attracted many multinational enterprises because all infrastructures will be placed in one place and doing business will be easier. And the other would be providing incentives for multinational enterprises which uses inputs from local firms. This will encourage the supply linkage between multinational enterprises and local firms. Okay. The other policies that might help is placing somehow legal requirements in some sectors for multinational enterprises to have a joint venture requirement. Even if it is not in Africa, for example, a good example is what is applied in China. So in China, multinational enterprises are required to form international joint venture or joint venture with local firms in order to do business in their country. So that could be also implemented depending on the nature of the sector, and it's also depending on the country situation. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And my final question to you is, what would you say to other academics out there who might consider a fellowship with ACET?
Yeah, thanks, Maura. So for fellows who are considering ACET, I'm going to confidently tell you that join ACET, then you will have a real impact on Africa's journey to economic transformation. You will have a chance to work with senior researchers and bring sustainable solutions for African economic and social problems. You'll have a regional and global career, and above all, you'll have enjoyable and friendly work environment. Thank you.
Well, there you have it, fellow academics, researchers, economists, policy folks, advocates. Come join our ACET family. You heard it here from Habtamu, and I'm sure we can all echo that same sentiment from whichever side we've entered ACET. So thank you, Habtamu, so much for your time today. And thank you everyone for watching. If you want to learn more about what ACET is doing, more about the research that Habtamu is doing and that other colleagues are doing, you can check us out at www.acetforafrica.org. And you can follow us on any social media platform you prefer at ACET for Africa. That's ACET for Africa. Until next time, stay well.